Was Blair Witch Project the scariest film ever made?
I don't feel too comfortable with seeing the last few days of my brother's life on video.
Because we're making a documentary.
Not about us getting lost. We're making a documentary about a witch.
We ended up in the same place. There's no one here to help you. That's your motivation.
If we get hurt or if we die out here, it's your fault!
Many think so, but others disagree and consider it a film where nothing actually happens. Love it or hate it, the film was truly a landmark in horror cinema.
How are we going to get the data across? How are we going to get the data across there? How are we going to get the data across?
So how can there be such a dichotomy? Let's explore why.
We made it clear to them, even in the audition process, we put a sheet out there that said, if you don't like camping, if you don't like being out in the woods, if you don't like being scared, don't even try out for this part.
Improvised feature film. At that point, it was called the Black Hills Project.
Okay.
But the main thing was that it was an improvised feature film. That, to me, that stopped me dead in my tracks because that is
doing improv.
Wow, that's a dream. That's creative freedom that you can only think about in your imagination that never actually happens. And then there was that whole part about wooded location and all that.
Mary Brown.
Mary Brown.
Yeah. And she was kind of crazy lady.
How was she seen by the community?
Crazy.
That's it, the American flag. That's Mary's house. I'm gonna grab her and bring her out. Why don't you take a look around to see what the best light is, all right?
It was 1999 and there was a buzz going on about a new film. As with all films, this one had a trailer, a very minimalist trailer which had been made.
Tell me where you are, John!
But it did include the title card, that is the opening scene of The Blair Witch. It read, in October of 1994, 3 student filmmakers disappeared into the woods near Burtsville, Maryland while shooting a documentary. A year later, their footage was found. This minimalist approach didn't give a lot away. However, it still managed to create an intrigue as anticipating audiences immediately understood that in that film, we will be viewing that found footage, enticing audiences with the curiosity of an unsolved mystery and what possible clues may lie within it. The trailer expertly enticed audiences into the mystery and discussion, and whilst the trailer may have been vague, more information was available elsewhere. Despite it being the early days of the internet, there was an official Blair Witch website dedicated to these missing students. This website adds to this intrigue.
I really don't think that the film would have done nearly as much money, as much business as it's done if it weren't for the website.
These students who went missing were Heather Donahue, Joshua Leonard, and Michael C. Williams.
There really wasn't anything that was scaring us. I mean, it's like, okay, there were horror movies, quote unquote, and they were kind of fun to kind of go check out and stuff like that.
It was scaring us that they were being made.
The movie was a documentary compiling the recovered lost footage from these 3 filmmakers who disappeared while investigating the Blair Witch legend in Maryland's Black Hills Forest.
It looks like slime, man. It's just water, man. It is slime. What the fuck is that?
They were going to investigate the legend of the Blair Witch in the Black Hills of Maryland. The Blair Witch was a local legend in that area who had been credited with being responsible for a number of horrific murders in the area over the past years.
This is Burkittsville, formerly Blair. It is a small, quiet Maryland town, much like a small, quiet town anywhere. No more than 20 families laid their roots here over 200 years ago, many of whom remain, either on this hill or in the town below.
The official website provided extensive background on the Blair Witch legend and the search for the missing students. This level of detail created an immersive experience for fans, fueling speculation and discussion across early internet forums and chat rooms. It is difficult to find this website. After all these years, if it is still up, then it has been lost and buried in a quarter of a century of uploaded content. The domain blairwitch.com simply now goes to a Lionsgate page. In addition, prior to the film's release, a separate documentary called The Curse of the Blair Witch was aired on cable TV shortly before the film's premiere.
Footage was found allegedly that was filmed by the 3 students. Contacted a local color lab. We got it developed and I reviewed the film.
This was even more detailed than the website. The documentary included interviews with historians, eyewitnesses and experts about the legend of the Blair Witch and dove into the mythology and folklore around it, as well as discussing the disappearance of the students.
We're doing a documentary about the Blair Witch. Oh, have you heard of the Blair Witch?
Oh yeah, that's an old story.
It incorporated photos of the characters, including childhood snapshots. It featured newspaper articles and interviews with actors, including Heather's film professor and Josh's girlfriend.
Thank you for one of the most creepy, chilling movies I have seen in a long time. It was so fun to go into a movie and actually really be scared and on the edge of my seat.
So even before seeing the film, the audience had well and truly been primed with this month-long marketing campaign, informing people about the found footage and missing film students. The stage was well and truly set, and the audience well and truly braced to watch a film that had gathered buzz and momentum well before its release. And then there were the missing posters. Missing posters and flyers of the three main characters, Heather, Josh, and Mike, were pinned up at film festivals and even on the streets of major cities. The posters asked for information on their whereabouts and directed people to the Blair Witch website. This certainly fueled the buzz and curiosity among potential viewers.
You've heard of the Blair Witch?
Several times.
Several times. And what was the first incident?
Well, I've heard stories about her from people and neighbors and stuff like that, but also I saw a documentary on the Discovery Channel or somewhere.
Yeah, it's a story my grandmother used to tell us all. Make us go to bed early.
Really?
Say if you stay up after dark or walk around the house too much, a Blair Witch would come and get you.
By the time the film premiered at Sundance Film Festival on January 2nd, 1999, the buzz generated at Sundance was exponentially amplified by early word-of-mouth and online discussions, particularly on independent film forums. But what about the film itself? Following the intriguing title card, the movie cuts to handheld footage of the three filmmakers, Heather Donahue, Joshua Leonard, and Michael Williams, who are introducing their project. Heather, the director of the group, confidently outlines the plan to investigate the legend and make a documentary on the Blair Witch. They would be traveling to a small town called Burtsville. Once in Burtsville, the students begin their documentary by interviewing local townspeople about their knowledge of the Blair Witch legend before setting off into the woods, camping in search of the Blair Witch.
The creepiest story about her that I ever heard was that two men were out hunting, and they were camped near the cabin or something that she's supposed to haunt. And they disappeared off the face of the earth.
Really?
Up until this point, it is all talk of folk law. Essentially, there is nothing sinister or dark, and the audience is presented with some authentic-seeming footage of three students in the late 1990s making a project and recording themselves on a weekend hiking trip. It is not until they are well into the woods that the project takes a frightening turn, when the students lose their way in the woods and gradually become increasingly spooked and hysterical. Their camaraderie and teamwork quickly disintegrates, and the dynamic between the trio becomes tense. And any friendships are transformed into tense arguments. Conversations are replaced with shouting matches and disputes. They become disorientated, and noises in the night spook them.
I gave you back the map, Heather.
I gave you the map.
I gave you back the map.
That map was useless!
This was your own.
That map was useless!
Map in the creek either.
We ended up in the same place. There's no one here to help you. That's your motivation.
If we get hurt or if we die out here, it's your fault!
The audience is drawn into the students' fear. And without creating a spoiler, the film's ambiguous ending and abrupt termination of the footage leave the viewer with the enduring mystery of what could possibly have happened to them. The found footage, after being viewed, offers no answers to their fate. Furthermore, the footage of the students emphasizes the darkness of their surroundings, the isolation of the woods where vision can't penetrate. Neither the students nor the audience know what lurks in those spaces of visual mystery, teasing us only with the audio. As the students become more disorientated and lost, as the days pass by, they hear increasingly disturbing sounds in their surroundings at night. We share their feeling that they are being watched, tracked, maybe even hunted.
I hear him. I hear him. I hear you. Josh!
The infinite dead space and terrifying audio, we are drawn to imagine things that are not there, terrifying things that mean us harm. The audience feels their terrifying experience being trapped in the woods that has harbored a legend and horrors over the decades. The audience imagines the horrors they experience in their final days before vanishing from the face of the earth. But guess what? It was all fake. The fact that much of the audience believed the found footage to be authentic was a key factor in the movie's viral marketing campaign and its ultimate success. But none of it was actually real. The official website was all a fabrication. The convincing documentary, with its true crime approach and having been presented in a serious, investigative style, had well and truly created the illusion that the film was based on true events was faux. Credibility to the film's lore, giving audiences a reason to believe that the Blair Witch legend was a genuine piece of American folklore. But none of it was real. It was a faux documentary with fake characters. There were no professors or experts, just actors playing a role. And the 3 missing film students were all actors, alive and well. Directed by Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez, it was their feature debut, and it was them who was entirely responsible for fabricating the elaborate backstory behind the Blair Witch legend. It was them who had created the missing posters. They had even gone so far as to keep the actors out of public view during the film's release so that they wouldn't be spotted. This was to ensure that the illusion that they were actually missing was maintained. This must have been the most elaborate marketing scheme ever. The angle had been pushed so effectively that many of the viewers believed the film was an actual documentary of real events. Many were still terrified having seen the film, and yet you never see the witch. You never see anything that is actually haunting or hunting them. The viewer's own imagination is required to interpret the sounds resounding from the woods in the dark and unknown space beyond the limited penetration of the torchlight. So how did it manage to be so terrifying still? This was because it had expertly focused on the psychological element and the power of suggestion, using the viewer's own imaginations to do most of the work. Much of the horror in the movie is driven by implication and ambiguity, rather than direct confrontation with the supernatural, capitalizing on the fear of the unknown and unseen, and creating a stark contrast with more traditional, studio-lit horror films. It had managed to conjure that innate fear that comes with being alone, in the woods, in the dark, surrounded by space with terrifying and unidentifiable noises resounding from the impenetrable spaces. Its clear intention was to generate the viewer's worst fears in their minds. But why then do some people say the film is boring and nothing actually happens? Well, that is because nothing much does happen. The film is ambiguous and vague. We never actually see the witch or discover what is tormenting the students. We are offered no explanation as to what occurred, and the film has an ambiguous ending. There are a couple of strange occurrences, but until the very end, the film largely shows a group of teenagers, lost and hysterical in the woods. Central to the intrigue and fear of the audience was the premise that the Blair Witch Project was real, and the footage shown in the film was authentic and genuine. It was this, the idea that it was true and that the found footage had really come from the missing students' SD cards was that created the fear and intrigue. In that sense, the audience didn't need much to happen. They were watching the film to conjure clues and solve the mystery, whilst simultaneously experiencing the fear of the 3 filmmakers. They weren't there to watch something happen. Imaginations ran wild with the idea that something supernatural and evil really might lurk in the woods. That was terrifying enough. These teenagers had just disappeared, and we were left with the last known evidence to uncover their fate. But once they know it's not real, the film is viewed with different eyes. And that is where the argument is presented that nothing much actually happens. As for some, it just wasn't scary once the reality was revealed to be fake. As when it comes down to it, the only real threats are ominous sounds, and whilst very little actually happens, there is still enough strangeness and ambiguity to suggest a malevolent supernatural presence without ever dispelling the ambiguity. In the end, the horror is all about how far the viewer allows themselves to feed into the realism of the documentary style of filmmaking and the fear of being lost in the woods and hysteria that can accompany the sense of loss of control. So, in 1999, there was no question why this film was labeled one of the scariest films ever made. Showing someone fresh now, you'd probably get an opposite reaction. And they would have some ground when the events of this movie are mundane. The marketing for the Blair Witch Project is still widely considered one of the most successful and innovative campaigns in film history. It blurred the lines between fiction and reality. It pioneered the use of internet-based viral marketing at a time when the internet was still relatively new, with its fictional but elaborate backstory that successfully captivated audiences and convinced many that the events depicted were real. The time was right. The internet was relatively new. Fake news wasn't a thing, and they didn't question what was real or fake to the extent they would now. It really would not be possible to generate this scenario with the same success again. The internet is too big now. The success was largely due to it being a first-time event. People won't be fooled to that extent twice. And so whilst there are now a lot of found footage films being made, they are never accompanied with the extensive backstory and marketing campaign we saw with the Blair Witch Project. Love it or hate it, the film is nevertheless often cited as a groundbreaking work for multiple reasons. Not only did the Blair Witch Project serve to popularize the found footage style, and the marketing campaign was one that had never been seen before, and one we will likely never see again. Even the sequel to the Blair Witch Project, Book of Shadows, is unable to achieve anything close to this.